Yeah, do you see anything, if you squint and look really carefully, do you see something in the deal that would help end the war and prevent any future invasion by Russia?
Frankly, I don't think to have businessmen and to have extraction projects across Ukraine is going to be deterring Vladimir Putin. If not, I think all the investments that were made before 2022, before the full-scale invasion, will have had some deterring effect. That's not the case. So, and like your correspondent was saying, I mean, this whole deal is based on the premise that Ukraine is sitting on huge deposits of rare earth, which is on paper probably true, but if you look at the capital intensiveness of extracting those rare earth, which are not located in the easiest part of the territory, but also are not necessarily the highest density deposit, it's not necessarily such a good business deal for US companies to extract. So I think it's more symbolic. It's a way for Donald Trump to feel that he has had a win, that he was validated in his view that the US needed to be reimbursed. But I don't think it's going to fundamentally change the economic future of Ukraine.
Yes, sir. You just found it. Intercourse with you. Let's chat.
Welcome to the Intercourse Show. I am your host, Mr. B. Today we have a very exciting show topic for you. It's finally happened. Ukraine and the U.S. reached an agreement on the minerals. There's been some controversy with this particular agreement. Obviously, Trump coming in to a war that was started by Joe Biden, that proxy war that he was fighting. We've given Ukraine over $200 billion, and Trump felt like the U.S. should get something back for that. So instead of just helping them blindlessly to continue this war that's costing us hundreds of billions of dollars, Trump said the U.S. might as well get some things for their assistance. So Trump went ahead and structured a mineral deal that would ensure at least $500 billion worth of revenue back to the U.S. to offset the amount that they've invested to help Ukraine fight Russia in this war. Now, when they last met, there was some controversy between Trump and Zelensky in the Oval Office, of course, that caused a big stir. It led to the U.S. limiting their assistance to Ukraine, which has resulted in them suffering a lot more losses. Obviously, they're formidable opponent to Russia because they're the much smaller country. Obviously, Russia is a bigger, heavily armed nuclear country. But at the same time, the U.S. has some state-of-the-art weapons that they've been given to Ukraine that's helped them keep them in the fight. But it has not changed the progress that Russia has been making to essentially take over their country little by little. So now an agreement has been reached, and this is the release of that agreement now.
Ukraine and the U.S. have agreed a deal that is expected to give Washington access to Ukraine's mineral deposits. The U.S. calls it a signal of its commitment to Ukrainian sovereignty. The Trump administration had long pushed for the deal under terms that were initially seen as extortionate in Kyiv. Now, both sides are hailing the revised agreement they signed in Washington on Wednesday.
After months of tense negotiations, Ukraine and the U.S. ink a minerals deal. Washington has long demanded compensation for the billions in aid it's given to Kyiv. Now, the Trump administration has secured preferential access to Ukraine's mineral resources and an equal share with Ukraine's government in exploiting them. The U.S. says the deal is a message to Russia.
Today's agreement signals clearly to Russian leadership that the Trump administration is committed to a peace process centered on a free, sovereign, and prosperous Ukraine over the long term.
According to the Ukrainian Geological Survey, the country has large deposits of minerals. These include graphite and lithium used in batteries for electric vehicles, and titanium and zirconium used in aerospace. There are also deposits of rare earth metals. Ukraine says the deal is a win-win.
This is a strategic deal for the creation of an investment partnership fund. It's truly an equal and good international deal on joint investment in the development and restoration of Ukraine between the governments of the United States and Ukraine.
Ukraine managed to negotiate away several punishing terms from earlier drafts. The deal doesn't give U.S. businesses special privileges over European investors that could hamper Ukraine's EU membership bid, and it won't be asked to compensate the U.S. for its previous assistance. Harsher terms were on the table when Zelensky visited Trump in February. The meeting was a diplomatic disaster. President Volodymyr Zelensky wanted security guarantees from the U.S. That's still off the table, but Trump says the new deal will discourage hostilities.
It's also good for them because you'll have an American presence at the site, Chris. And the American presence will, I think, keep a lot of bad actors out of the country, or certainly out of the area where we're doing the digging. So
signing the deal may have been the easy part. Some of the resources lie in Russian-occupied territory. Ukraine says those reserves are worth 350 billion euros.
So when will the US see financial payback for this deal with Ukraine? This is our Kyiv correspondent, Nick Connolly's take.
Not anytime soon seems to be the answer. There is a lot of speculation, a lot of things that are still unclear about this deal. We've had very different readouts from the Ukrainian and the American sides about how this is actually going to work. But it seems, this is what the Ukrainians are saying at least, that basically this fund where all the income from giving licenses to develop these rare earth metals and also critical metals, that will be reinvested in Ukraine basically for the first 10 years. So that basically at the earliest, the US is going to see some kind of return on this 10 years down the line, if at all these licenses are sold and actually this investment happens. Because right now you have to ask yourself, what international company is going to invest serious amounts of money into these projects and are going to take years, if not decades, to actually bring profit when Ukraine's geopolitical future is so uncertain. So lots of question marks, but certainly a sense here in Kyiv that this is about giving Donald Trump a win, something that he can sell as something he's achieved in his first 100 days, and try and keep Trump on side during these negotiations where obviously he's been pretty negative towards Volodymyr Zelensky, to the Ukrainian side, and very keen to find explanations for Russia's behavior and to kind of let them off the hook.
Okay, we're going to shift a little bit here. I found some additional terms of the deal. I went ahead and Googled some things just to understand what some of the key terms are. So as they expounded upon, there it will be an establishment of a joint investment fund, a fund that will be established, jointly managed, and co-owned by Ukraine and the U.S. to finance projects in critical minerals, oil, and gas. In terms of revenue sharing, 50% of the revenue from new Ukraine natural resource licenses will go towards the fund. In terms of ownership of the land, Ukraine still retains the ownership of the land and its resources, and it will leave Ukraine to determine what can be extracted and where it can be extracted. Fund investment, the fund will invest in extraction projects for critical materials, oil, gas, as well as related infrastructure and processing. The U.S. contribution. The U.S. will contribute to the fund directly and potentially through new military assistance, such as air defense systems. No debt obligations. The deal does not impose any debt obligations on Ukraine for past U.S. military aid. Focus on the future. The agreement focuses on future assistance, not past aid. No taxation. Contributions to the fund will not be taxed in either the U.S. or Ukraine. And technology transfer. Technology transfer and development are key parts of the agreement. Now, I don't see the big win for the U.S. in terms of this. Now, naturally, the U.S. needs a lot of these critical minerals in order to make some of these semiconductor chips that are critical components of the military equipment that they make. They're also critical components of electricity. And so we're trying to move things towards these quantum computers, which requires a lot of energy. And in order for you to do these things with AI and some of the investments being made there, you need to have the resources to pull from. China, I believe, controls more than 80% of those resources. So they're very competitive and ahead of the curve when it comes to that. The U.S. feels like it's lagging behind. So it's done a couple of strategic steps to get caught up to speed. A deal with Ukraine allows them to have access to huge sources of minerals that are essential to building some of these products. But also, they also did a deal with the DRC, which is the Republic of Congo, I believe. And they just intervene with the war happening, the civil war happening within that country, just so that they can secure additional minerals through them. And then this deal with Ukraine, there's also some talks that for the area that Russia controls in Ukraine, as well as some some places within Russia, that Russia's open to doing deals with that. So the U.S. is trying to secure its access to critical minerals that they can have control of in order for them to, make products that's going to help them for the self-defense, etc. Now, I thought there was going to be some dollar amount attached to this, but I found it extremely interesting that there is no debt obligation, because I thought the whole point that Trump made was that Europe was providing funding in accordance to debt. So every time Europe was helping Ukraine fight this war, they were essentially loaning Ukraine money, so they are essentially debtors of Ukraine. The U.S., who obviously loaned the most money, was supposed to be taking some sort of debt repayment back towards them. Now, this does seem like it's more of a win for Ukraine if there isn't a debt obligation and they have a 10-year buffer before these revenue splits kick in and the U.S. starts to reap some benefits. But it does not say that there's a specific end time to the deal. So that means if they're strategic partners for an indefinite amount of time, then that means they can make hundreds of billions of dollars, if not trillions of dollars worth of income from this. Because once that 10-year buffer kicks and it's time for us to extract the money, over time, 20, 30, 40 years, we may well exceed the amount that we lent. So yes, pros and cons to that, but it just still means that there's a huge amount of time in between that. Now, I think it does in some way give some security to Ukraine, because naturally, if we have an interest, we're going to fight to protect our interests in that country. So it should change the paradigm of power to Russia and signal that the U.S. is not going to stand around and watch the Ukrainian government get pulverized and their deal is not going to be honored. So this now makes it interesting. And I think it's a little challenging because, to me, it raises the stakes a little more. We'll go ahead back to listen to further details within this deal, but I think these are some of the critical parts. I wanted to, give further context to what was agreed to.
PW's Nick Connolly there in Kiev. And for another perspective, let's bring in military analyst Marina Miron from the Defense Studies Department at King's College London. Marina, do you see this as a good deal for Ukraine?
Good day, Gerhard. Well, at present, we don't have a very specific deal. If we compare a deal that was signed by the Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister Yulia Sviridenko yesterday, it is about 12 pages in length, as opposed to what we have seen in February, which was 90 pages in length. So what is being defined in this new deal, there are a lot of question marks on how this is going to work and how this is going to be operationalized, meaning that the next big hurdle will be after, if the Ukrainian parliament ratifies this document, that technical descriptor to how this is going to work and which obligations each party has. And this, I think, will be key in terms of being able to assess how workable is this deal.
Now, do you see anything in this deal that would help end the war and prevent a future invasion by Russia?
As Nick Connolly has said, the returns on investment for this deal might take a while, and the Ukrainian side has expressed cautious skepticism regarding the economic value and the security value of this deal, because this deal does not include any explicit security guarantees. And the Ukrainian deputy prime minister expressed the hope that the United States might continue military assistance to Ukraine, specifically in form of air defenses. But the good thing for the United States, and this paper actually benefits the United States in the first place, is that there is no explicit obligation on the part of the United States to do anything in that specific area. So I don't think that at present, even if it was implemented today, that there would be a change on the battlefield, simply because you first need to do a geological survey, to find investors who would be willing to take upon them the risk. And I'm not even talking about the part of the territories being controlled by Russia right now, where some of those minerals are, but just the viability of developing those large-scale projects and finding a market niche, and the market which is being controlled by China, is it all worth it? And so there are a lot of questions. Therefore, I don't think it has anything to do with the military operations and the war going on right now as it is per se, and I don't think there will be a change.
Now, there definitely appears to be a return of goodwill between the two sides after the very difficult Oval Office meeting 2 months ago. Might that be as important as anything else?
Well, I think it is more on the diplomatic level that you have the importance of this deal, and specifically for the Trump administration to be able to show something to his domestic constituent population, because his ratings are falling and he needs to justify the US involvement somehow. However, for Ukraine, what is interesting is that it's not President Zelensky signing the deal. It's the deputy prime minister signing the deal, which calls into question what is going to happen, even if President Zelensky signed it, what is going to happen after the elections when the new administration comes. And Russia is an example of where in mid-90s such deals didn't work, because many assets were nationalized under Putin. So it can go pear-shaped, certainly. And what are the mechanisms to guarantee it doesn't happen under the future administration? So there are a lot of question marks. For now, we will wait and see what happens.
The military analyst, Marina Miron from King's College London. Thank you, Marina. And now let's get the Russian perspective on this. Our former Moscow bureau chief, Yuri Resheto, is reporting from Riga after the Kremlin kicked DW out of Russia. Yuri, after all the goodwill between the White House and the Kremlin, the first agreement coming out of the war is not with Russia, but Ukraine. How is Moscow reacting?
So far, Gerhard, there has been no official reaction from the Kremlin, but I'm sure that any political rapprochement between Kiev and Washington is viewed in Moscow with anger, suspicion, and even malicious joy, let's say, in Russia, even if there is no actual damage for Ukraine. We see this in the social media of former Russian President Medvedev. He has posted that Trump has destroyed the Kiev regime, as Medvedev calls the Ukrainian leadership, so that US aid could be repaid with national prosperity and even the disappearance of Ukraine. Besides that, Gerhard, we see reports from the Russian military about their own territorial gains, losses of the Ukrainian army, and further missile strikes by the Russians on Ukraine, and on the one hand, and drone attacks by the Ukrainians on Russia on the other. So, agreement or not, the war goes on.
So now there's this agreement, plus word that the U.S. Senate will impose, quote, bone-crushing sanctions, including huge tariffs on major Russian exports, if Vladimir Putin does not get serious about peace. You think it makes Putin nervous?
I assume that Putin is not nervous as long as his army is successful in Ukraine, and it seems to be right now. But even the Russian army is not all powerful, and the Russian society is not forever happy with the war, and the Russian economy has also been suffering under sanctions. That is why Putin thinks pragmatically. He sees Trump as someone who will approach him and make some concessions, and he's taking the opportunity. Now the tariffs or potential new sanctions you mentioned may give Putin some food for thought, so to say, and possibly annoy him much more than the agreement with the Ukraine, as the Russians are negotiating with the Americans on other subjects, on trade, flight connections, cooperation in the Arctic, and so on and so on. Yes, Trump's agreement with Zelensky could be upsetting for Putin, but who knows what agreements Putin will sign with Putin tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. But right now, yes, the threat from the senator could be annoying for Putin about tariffs.
Now, in a few days, Russia will celebrate the 80th anniversary of its victory over Nazi Germany. Do you think this agreement between the US and Ukraine will put a damper on the mood?
Well, Victory Day is on May 9, is the most important national holiday in Russia, and this year also marks the 80th anniversary. And there is even speculation as to whether Trump might come to Moscow for the military parade. For Putin, every foreign state guest is not only a sign of solidarity with Russia as a winner in the World War II, but also a symbol of recognition of the Kremlin's policy above all its war against Ukraine. For the past 3 years, Russian propaganda has deliberately linked this war to the World War II, because from the Russian point of view, from Russian perspective, this is a war against the supposed threat of Nazis in Ukraine. And because the significance of the Day of Victory for Russian state ideology is so great, I think agreement with Ukraine or not, it's unlikely to influence Victory Day on May 9.
CW correspondent Yuri Resheta there. Thanks, Yuri.
For more on this, we want to speak with Fabrice Potier. He's a policy planner for NATO. He now focuses on foreign policy and strategic issues for Rasmussen Global Consulting and joins me. What do you think of this deal? How significant is it? Is it as big as the White House has made it out to be?
Well, obviously, I've not seen the very final agreement, but having seen the previous versions, I think we're clearly in a better place, or at least from a Ukrainian point of view, than in the first version, where, for example, there was a recognition, some form of recognition of a kind of debt that Ukraine owed to the United States for their contributions to the war effort. That's no longer there. There is also in this new agreement, this final agreement, recognition of the compatibility of the agreement with the EU integration process, which obviously is an important matter for Ukraine, for the EU. So I think overall it's not as bad as it looked first, but obviously it does not clarify the central question which your correspondent was mentioning, which is there a form of US guarantee here, or is it just a contractual guarantee, which frankly with Donald Trump doesn't have a great track record of meeting his contractual obligations as a businessman?
Yeah, we heard President Trump say, we want something for our efforts, and he's got a financial deal in front of him finally. But former President Joe Biden and European leaders long suggested that was maintaining world order by keeping Russia in check. Does this deal help that cause?
I think this is a very typical symbol of Donald Trump's high level of transactionalism, where he thinks relations between countries, especially partners, are defined by business bottom line. And obviously it misses the bigger point here, as you were mentioning, is how is it keeping the United States, the government, not just its companies, in Ukraine as a guarantor of a future sovereign and independent Ukraine? And I think here the United States is dodging that question, and it kind of assume that the Europeans are going to deliver, but the bottom line is the Europeans can only deliver some serious security guarantees if they feel they have some form of backup from the United States. So we are back to square one, and I think we have still not solved that.
Yeah, do you see anything, if you squint and look really carefully, do you see something in the deal that would help end the war and prevent any future invasion by Russia?
Frankly, I don't think to have businessmen and to have extraction projects across Ukraine is going to be deterring Vladimir Putin. If not, I think all the investments that were made before 2022, before the full-scale invasion, will have had some deterring effect. That's not the case. So, and like your correspondent was saying, I mean, this whole deal is based on the premise that Ukraine is sitting on huge deposits of rare earth, which is on paper probably true. But if you look at the capital intensiveness of extracting those rare earth, which are not located in the easiest part of the territory, but also are not necessarily the highest density deposit, it's not necessarily such a good business deal for US companies to extract. So I think it's more symbolic. It's a way for Donald Trump to feel that he has had a win, that he was validated in his view that the US needed to be reimbursed. But I don't think it's going to fundamentally change the economic future of Ukraine.
Okay, I think this is a good point for me to interject. I think that man just made a very good point. This deal doesn't really seem to favor the U.S. based on what we've been seeing. I'm reading a article that was done by the National Review, and the title of the article is "Russia Mocks Mineral Resource Deal, Claims Ukraine Will Disappear." Okay, now this, and I'm going to share the article as we go through this. Now, in this little excerpt here, it says Ukraine is expected to retain full control over subsoil infrastructure and natural resources under the deal. Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal said. Denis Shmyhal said, I'm sorry. It also does not provide any debt obligation that Ukraine owes the U.S., contrary to the Medvedev statement. Now, this key is very interesting. The whole purpose of Trump crafting this deal was supposed to be to recoup the monies that the Biden administration sent over to Ukraine without terms. His point was that the Europeans lent money to Ukraine, so every dollar they sent to Ukraine, they expect to get a return on investment for that. But we were giving them the money. And Trump was trying to rectify that by saying, hey, since we front-loaded you all this money for military equipment, for technology, for recruiting of your troops, and all these different things, we're going to need to recoup some money back, so we're going to do this mineral deal to pay back this debt. So this debt would have been looming over Ukraine. Now, this is an interesting point. It says it clearly said that there's no debt for Ukraine, so we are not owing something to the United States for the moment. Ukrainian parliament member Olevsky Gosharenko told Al Jazeera, signaling potential U.S. military aid in the future. Now, this is the part I found to be particularly interesting. If the United States sends us more weapons, then it will be a part of this deal, so then we will return this money. Okay. Now, this part makes things a little more confusing to me because technically the U.S. is trying to get a ceasefire and trying to get the war to stop. So if we're going to send Ukraine more weapons and military assistance, then we're starting to keep track of that debt. And then the United States will then be entitled to track that debt under this new minerals agreement. So now they'll start saying, okay, we sent you $100 million worth of weapons. Now your debt to us for all these future weapons will be $100 million. That's how I'm kind of reading into this. And now it becomes a debt that they eventually have to pay back. But then he says, after the deal was signed, the United States Department notified the Senate that it is planning to sell $50 million or more in military equipment to Ukraine. If approved, the money will be transferred under direct commercial sales which gives U.S. defense companies permission to sell weapons directly to a foreign buyer. The process offers an alternative to the Pentagon's foreign military sales program. The minerals deal underwent a 2-month negotiation process. Okay, now, this is where things get sticky. We're trying to negotiate a ceasefire with Russia, in which case we were not going to continue assisting Ukraine by providing them military assistance through weapons and things of that nature, because that's essentially how we're essentially a part of this proxy war. Ukraine don't make enough weapons to fight Russia, so they need the assistance from the US and NATO. Now we're agreeing under the terms of this military deal to send them military assistance, $50 million worth, for them to be able, that's in weapons and different military equipment and stuff, for them to then be able to continue the fight. But that poses contrary to the objective of stopping the fight. So to me, this seems to favor more Ukraine than it does the US. And I don't know why Donald Trump would agree to something like that. Obviously, Russia's no angel, but I think their whole point in fighting is not to have NATO on their border. And as long as Ukraine is willing to take the position of, we will not join NATO, we will remain a neutral country that separates NATO from Russia, and we won't make any attempts in the future to join NATO so that NATO's at the border of Russia, then I think the fighting essentially stops. Now that we're agreeing to this mineral deal, I thought the mineral deal was meant to recoup debts owed from the Biden administration that forwarded hundreds of billions of dollars. I think Trump has always said that number is close to $350 billion that we've sent out to Zelensky and the Ukrainians, and we were going to recoup that money. This agreement is saying they don't have a debt to us of $350 billion or whatever the amount is, and that they don't have to pay us back for that money. And if anything, they're only paying us back for future weapons that we send to them. So if we're sending them $50 million of military weapon, then we'll start keeping a tab and say, well, you owe us $50 million, of which we'll extract that money from revenues and profits made off this fund. To me, I don't really see the gain here, other than it's advantageous for the U.S. to have access to mineral oils from an allied country. That's advantageous. But technically, we're still in the hole of the $350 billion. We were trying not to continue to fight, but now we've agreed to send them $50 million worth of weapons so that they can continue to fight. And now they'll start to track the $50 million worth of weapons as debt, like they owe us for that amount of money. And then we're not expecting a return on any of these things for 10 years. So we'll establish a fund, get companies to come in. The U.S. will put in some money. Private companies will put in some money. Ukraine might put in some money. They're now get companies to come in to go pretty much build the equipment to extract the land. Then they have to create a market for it, sell it, and then the proceeds from the sale will be used to rebuild the Ukraine, whichever parts have been damaged. And after 10 years, the U.S. gets to see $1 from that, or 50% of those proceeds from that. Plus, they're now, in addition, they'll be able to recoup monies for any future military assistance provided to Ukraine since the signing of the deal. But they don't get anything for what we've already given them. I don't think that's a win for the U.S. And really and truly, if this deal involves the U.S. into that conflict and it doesn't recoup any of the debt that the U.S. already has, and that the U.S. the money that the U.S. has already given Ukraine, then it doesn't meet the objective of recouping the money, because Europe, for whatever reason, are getting their money recouped first. Debtors get paid first, right? Before, partners do. So Europe will get their money off the top first, but the U.S. still doesn't. I don't understand why this is advantageous. I'm trying to see the value of this deal. Maybe this more in the details that I'm not seeing here, but I just don't see it. I mean, I don't see the value in this deal from what's being listed here. And it seems like they're really honing in on these points that they don't have to pay any prior debts from monies they received before, which I thought there was going to be an accounting of all the money we sent to these guys. Where did the money go? Right? I don't get that. So in a way, there are some valid points being made that this is not advantageous for the U.S. And if nothing else, it's just a public relations win for Donald Trump. He gets to say he got a minerals deal in place that secures access to certain minerals for future. Now, I don't know what the value of that may be long term. Maybe in long term, it's a win because there's a ton of money that's to be made from it. But the point this man made was that the cost of extracting mineral deals from the ground can be a lot. So you got the fund, but then these people have to now get the money to extract the minerals out, which means any private sector companies coming in to do this, if they spend, say, $50 billion just to set up the infrastructure to be able to mine the minerals, convert them into some sellable product, and then ship them out, that's still another $50 billion that they have to recoup before they're doing any profit share. And that could take even longer than 10 years for anybody to see a return on investment. So I don't know. I don't love how this is sounding. I don't love how it's sounding, but we'll there's about 2 minutes left in this video. Let's let this finish out, and then we'll go back. We'll conclude.
Looking for more silver linings, I guess. Let's go back 2 months to the White House visit by Zelensky when he was ostensibly there to sign this deal in February. Was it fortunate in hindsight for Ukraine that he did not sign it then?
Well, clearly, at least what we could see of the previous versions, they were more, I think, closer to a kind of banana republic type of agreement, which was deeply offensive to Ukraine, especially given that Ukraine is fighting for its independence and sovereignty. And when you could read the first version of this agreement, they were, in a way, denying Ukraine kind of equal sovereign rights to the United States. And there was this notion that somehow Ukraine owed hundreds of billions of dollars to United States, which frankly is a fantasy, because as you know, the countries that have contributed most to the war effort in Ukraine, outside Ukraine, are the country of the European Union. The United States has contributed up to 150 billion euro, but the 300 plus billion dollar figure that was mentioned in the original version is just a Trump fantasy here. So I think it's good that Zelensky resisted the signature of this deal, because it would have been undermining in a way Ukraine's sovereignty, when actually everything we've done, including the United States over the past 3 years, is to try to secure Ukraine's sovereignty. That was the very sad irony of this deal.
Former NATO policy expert Fabrice Portier, now CEO of Rasmussen Global. Thanks so much for your time, as always. Good to see you.
Okay. So there you have it. My final thoughts on this is that I don't know that this was a good deal for that we closed up on. Yes, the minerals deal says at least we're going to get something from everything we've invested into this. But now, the cons to this is that now we have a vested stake in this, which means now we have to get involved. If Russia continues to be aggressive, it now affects our interest. And now we do have to take a position. We may have to fight, which may be a cost again to us, of which these mineral deals may not potentially pay us back for that if we're paying additional costs to now step in on our own dime to further support and protect and defend Ukraine and our interest. You know what I mean? That's not advantageous for us. It just means we're going to go in the red even more. And it may result in American lives and people being put on the front line in order to defend that interest. To me, this isn't a good deal. I thought it probably would have been better had Trump just made the deal with Russia. Russia's already taken over a good portion of the eastern part of Ukraine where there are a lot of minerals. He could have just went directly to them and said, look, our interest here is in the minerals. So if you don't want us involved, we want to be able to recoup from the minerals. We'll work with you to recoup from the minerals that you now have ownership over. And we'll take a portion. We'll take up until what was owed plus some interest, you know what I mean, from the portion you have. In addition to that, we'll ensure that there isn't some sort of membership into NATO. We'll do our part to ensure that doesn't happen, and the conflict stops. To me, I feel like that's more advantageous because now Russia's not going to advance. They know, okay, the U.S. is not going to get involved. What's the name's not going to join NATO, which is what everybody wanted in the first place. And they keep their little territory. We take from the minerals, still would have been a part of Ukraine that Russia now controls. And Ukraine then has to pay us back some portion of what we've lent them, period, for us negotiating that deal. I think that would have been a more advantageous win for them. At this point, if the deal is as it's stated or the details I'm getting, there may be some things that's not disclosed here. So maybe it is a lot more favorable and we just don't have the fullness of the details, but I just don't see it. Long term, it's going to take so long for us to even get a return. And the problem to me is after Trump gets out of office, let's just say 4 years from now, Trump is out of office and another Democrat occupies office. They can totally negate the deal. And Ukraine would not be obligated, would not have any debt to pay because there's no debt. Trump's only got a 4-year lifespan on his thing. So if somebody comes in and says, yeah, we're canceling that minerals deal, we no longer want to take part in extracting any minerals. Whatever Ukraine extracts, they get to keep. We're not going to look for 50%. And now we would have given Ukraine all that money. We didn't get anything for it. And any future administration that is not the Trump administration may decide they don't want to continue with it. So it's hard to enforce if the timeline to reap returns is 10 years. Trump's only got 4 years in office, right? And that's assuming that's 2 additional terms. So if he's got 4 years in office and there's going to be another 4 years where the Democrats could potentially win the next election. And their position may be, you don't owe us anything, Ukraine. We don't care. So now we would have spent that money plus any additional money that we're going to support them over the course of the next 4 years. And really and truly, somebody in the future could rip up the agreement and say Ukraine don't owe us nothing. Trump was overreacting. Don't worry about it, which I think is probably Ukraine's calculus. Like, that's how they're thinking about it. Let's push their return as far out as possible, agree on the face of it, then renege. Once there's a new administration, we'll renegotiate it. To me, that's not an advantageous deal for Trump. But what do I know? I'm just speculating. These people are experts. Apparently, they know a little better than me. That's where they sit. That being said, all we can do is pray that this whole situation doesn't end up into a World War III scenario where the U.S. is now directly in conflict with Russia, not through a proxy, but now because we have interests, we're now vying to defend our stake, our interests, and further giving these people a platform to provoke the country with the most nuclear weapons. Well, that is my thoughts on this particular deal. I wanted to give an update on this because this has been a subject that we've discussed before on this show. I ask that if you are not already connected to the show, you like and subscribe, and also share the video, and also have a conversation around it just to see, where you stand and let your voice be heard. Again, I urge everyone to keep our president in prayer, keep the country in prayer, and let's just hope this resolves in peace and harmony. All right, that's it. Signing out, Mr. B.